Hi, I'm Steve Logan. I'm a Welsh songwriter and rock musician. I want to talk today about the 10,000 hour rule, or so called rule, in relation to Jimi Hendrix and talent. Talent is a term that nearly everybody who speaks English knows, but the origin of it's perhaps less familiar. It comes from the New Testament, where a story is told about three people being given a certain number of talents each. A talent was a coin. So one person is given a single coin, and the other two are given more than one coin. And they all use the coins in different ways. The people who've got 2 and 3 coins, they invest them at different rates of interest. But the person who's got the one coin is anxious about losing it, so buries it and doesn't make any interest. And this displeases the person who'd given all three of them their gifts. So that's where the idea of talent as a gift comes from. And linked to it is the idea that it's something that you can use in different ways and with different results. Wittgenstein said that genius, which is often thought of as what happens when talent gets to its limit and has to break into another sphere altogether, he said that genius was a capacity for concentration. It's the capacity to focus on a particular thing that you're interested in for sustained periods of time and to keep doing it. And you could say that talent is a matter of interest. In order to be seen as somebody with talent, you probably need to be seen as somebody who's got an interest which is sustained and self-replenishing because you get rewarded for pursuing it. Well, there's been a lot of talk in the guitar world about 10,000 hours of practice, and I don't suppose that anybody seriously disputes that in order to become extremely able at playing a guitar of any kind, you need a lot of practice. And probably the more practice you have and the more skillful the practice is, that's to say, the more cleverly it's devised so as to promote the development of your own abilities, then the better you'll become at playing guitar. But because the term 10,000 hours has been bandied about and because it's referred to as a rule, I thought it bore looking into a bit. For a start, the whole notion was popularized only as recently as 2008 in a book by Malcolm Gladwell called Outliers, The Story of Success. And it's notable that the focus of his book is success defined in a range of different ways. Gladwell had got the idea of 10,000 hours from a psychologist, a research psychologist called Anders Ericsson. And Ericsson had studied violinists. And he found that the ones who showed the most notable ability, of course, that's something that you'd have to define, usually had by the age of 20 clocked up at least 10,000 hours of practice. Now, in the scientific community, there's been some criticism. Just let me turn that off. In the scientific community, there's been some criticism of Ericsson's article. It's been suggested that it oversimplifies the complexity of the question. It's been suggested that Gladwell, in turn, misinterprets Ericsson, who does, after all, acknowledge that there are many careful qualifications that you need to introduce in order to make use of this 10,000 hour rule. And the criticism is also that the context of the study matters a great deal. I suppose that the main thing I would say about it is that if you look at classical violinists, they're judged in a different way from guitarists. So it's quite clear if you look at the guitar world that you do have people who are acknowledged virtuosi, people like Guthrie Govan or Steve Vai. But you also have a lot of guitarists who don't have anything like that ability, that sheer technical ability, who are nonetheless respected. And what you need in order to excel in different genres, let's say folk, blues, classic rock, alternative rock, funk, all those things are very different. Jazz, different again. So it's clear that there are some ways in which you need to qualify the basic idea of 10,000 hours. If you want to be a concert violinist, then there is a level of technical proficiency that you simply have to reach. And I don't think it's true to say that that is a criterion that applies with equal firmness in the very amorphous world of guitar playing. But I thought that it would be a good idea to look at this whole issue in relation to a specific person who is generally regarded as a supreme master of guitar. I'm aware that there are people who find fault with Hendrix, but the consensus generally seems to be that as a pioneer as well as a player, he is unique. But there are some things about him which are a bit surprising. Hendrix was born in 1942. He died in 1970 at the age of 27. And the first surprising thing about him is that he didn't start playing guitar until he was 15. If, for example, you went to a music conservatoire and you said that you wanted to be a concert violinist and that you'd started playing at 15, my guess is that they'd have pretty serious doubts about you. Anyway, he started playing at 15, and during the period between 15 and 19, he was enlisted in the army, which was given to him, I believe, as an alternative punishment for having stolen a couple of cars. So when he was in the army, it was very difficult for him to play guitar, even when he had access to one, and he didn't the whole of the time that he was there. Nonetheless, by the time he was 19, Billy Cox was really impressed at hearing Hendrix play at an army club. Cox said that Hendrix sounded like a combination of John Lee Hooker and Beethoven. So the innovativeness was already there. He was combining things that maybe wouldn't usually be combined and making something new. In that same year, Cox and Hendrix formed the first version of the Casuals. Now, at that time, Hendrix had been playing for 4 years. Let's suppose that on average, he was able to practice 3 hours a day. That's roughly 1,000 hours of practice per year. So in 4 years, he would have done 4,000 hours. But already, Billy Cox is noticing that there's something remarkable about him. If you want to contrast that with his achievement in another area, it's worth noting what his platoon sergeant said about him at the same time. He said that Hendrix has no interest whatever in the army. He'll never come up to the standards required of a soldier, and he was recommended for an early discharge. That's the profound lack of interest, which is the opposite of what we call talent, or what we might consider as necessary for talent. By 1963, when Hendrix was 20 to 21, he was already playing as an occasional backing musician for Wilson Pickett, Sam Cooke, and Ike and Tina Turner, among others. By the end of that time, he'd been playing for 5 years. That's to say, he might have done 5,000 hours of practice at 3 hours a day. So he's done half the amount that is stated as necessary if you want to achieve the highest ability in the mastery of an instrument. Of course, I'm aware that I am assuming that he's done 3 hours a day, but I'll say later why it is that I'm settling on that as a figure. 1964, he was 22. He became a member of the Isley Brothers, their backing band. He plays on his first release, a song called Testify. You can hear this now on Spotify in two versions, one of which foregrounds Hendrix's guitar playing. You can hear very fast, obviously improvised pentatonic licks, and you can hear some typically zestful, driving rhythm playing with partial chords. By that time, Hendrix had been playing for 6 years, 6,000 hours of practice at 3 hours a day. 1966 is often regarded as a pivotal moment in Hendrix's career. He moved to England after Chaz Chandler became his manager. He was recommended to Chandler by Linda Keith. Linda Keith was Keith Richards' girlfriend at the time. She recommended Hendrix to the Stones' manager, Andrew Oldham, but Oldham rejected him. But she subsequently recommended him to Chandler, who thought that there was definitely something that could be done with him as an artist in the UK. Chandler helped Hendrix to recruit Noel Redding and Mitch Mitchell and form the Experience. And he also suggested that Jimi Hendrix change the spelling of his first name to Jimi. Hey Joe was recorded that year, and it entered the UK charts. Hendrix by then had been playing for 8 years. Let's say he'd done 8,000 hours at 3 hours a day. The following year, 1967, was probably the breakthrough year for Hendrix. Purple Haze and The Wind Cries Mary, I recorded them, both entered the UK charts. People who are now, let's say, learning guitar and try to learn songs by Hendrix would definitely study the recording of Purple Haze. And although some people would say that there were areas of experimentation that Hendrix hadn't yet gone into, I don't think that many people would feel that Hendrix was at all short of the technical prowess that he became known for. He's already known for it by now. By this period, he's been playing for 8 years, and let's call that 8,000 hours of practice at 3 hours a day. Of course, it's pretty certain that Hendrix played more than 3 hours a day on some days. Some gigs that he played, and he was doing a lot of gigs well before he came to the UK. Some of the gigs would have been 3 hours. But his practice regime, which wasn't really a regime, he just picked up the guitar whenever he could. And people have spoken about it being difficult to get it out of his hands. That his practicing of the guitar would have been interrupted by things like travel, illness, fatigue, press obligations, studio visits, all sorts of things. So it doesn't seem unreasonable to stick with the three hours a day idea, averaging that across all the days in the year. So I think that even with that proviso, we can say 3 things pretty confidently. The first is that Hendrix started relatively late, 15. Second, he was noticed for his ability by somebody whose judgment counted for the first time when he'd been playing for 3 to 4 years. He began, this is the third thing, he began playing live and recording by the time he was 20 to 21, and by then he'd been playing for only 5 to 6 years. So Hendrix used what he knew, and he used it as fully as possible at every stage of his short but uniquely spectacular career. It could be argued that although he didn't benefit from the internet or even a lot of guitar manuals, his mind wasn't cluttered by them either, and he could focus on the things that came his way, the records he had access to, the things that he heard on the radio, the bands that he went to hear, and the bands that he played with. It's likely that he concentrated as hard as he did on guitar because he loved the sound of it, and he recognized within it possibilities which he would be able to realize once he became pretty confident as a player. All of that, I think, is more important than the sheer number of hours he may have put in, which of course we can never know exactly. Proficiency is technical ability without expressive power. We've all seen child prodigy guitarists who are amazing technically, but who may not interest us very much musically. This is because they haven't yet developed something that they urgently want to express and haven't learned to express it through the technique that they have in guitar playing. Given a choice, I think most people prefer modest technical abilities with strong expressive drive, rather than higher technical abilities with more limited expressive drive. But they don't have to be alternatives, and in Hendrix's case, they weren't. He subsequently, or quite quickly within his career, learned songwriting. He also learned how to sing. And given that he had misgivings about singing, there's probably an indication of his characteristic drive there. If Hendrix had been convinced or remained convinced that he needed to sing like Little Richard in order to call himself a singer, then he probably wouldn't have sung. But he became convinced, not least because others reassured him, that he had a uniquely expressive singing style, and he used it. Much as some guitarists use their guitar playing, which might not be up to the level of Hendrix's, let alone more recent virtuoso guitarists, but nonetheless enables them to express something that's their own and that connects with other people. Thanks very much. I'll see you next time.